Hello,
Hello.
I'm Howie Sheriff, and welcome to another show from You Call This Yoga, our internet TV show about accessible yoga, where we bring leaders in the field from around the country and sometimes out of the country to share with you their paths, stories, and inspirations about accessible yoga. Yoga is more than just a physical practice, though it is an element of it, in that we're trying to prepare ourselves to be more open and receive and share and reach our own divines. We each have our interpretations of what a practice may mean, and I like to invite folks to share their perspectives on the show by calling in at 919-518-9773, Skype on Computer's 2K Voice, the chat box that you've logged onto for Nissan Communications. We also would like your review after the show, and that way we can figure out how to do something a little better because it's still new and we're adapting to this process. It's thrilling to have a grand inspiration on the show in that Matthew Sanford is a leader in bringing accessible yoga to the world. I heard about him and was able to meet him at a seminar in Raleigh about 8 or 9 years ago. And it struck me significantly in that I've had my own physical challenges and limitations and get caught up in some of the limits more than what is. He's inspired me and our nonprofit organization, and his organization, Mind Body Solutions, is definitely a model from which You Call This Yoga will be learning more from. Also in the studio, I have our friend Celia Hartnett, who's off camera, who will be on later as she'll be hosting the show next week with Lisa Clark. Celia will be on some point after one of our pearls to share interviewing with Matthew. But without further ado, because I've rambled more than usual, I think, let's bring Matthew on, who can introduce himself to those who haven't met him yet, and to share some of his background in terms of how he became introduced to yoga and what he was negotiating with when he did become introduced to yoga. Good morning, Matthew in Minneapolis.
Hi, nice to be here. So do you just want me to start talking about my story or?
Yes, please.
Well, I'm 51 now. I was in a car accident when I was 13. The car accident, my whole family was in the car. It's kind of one of the lines from my book is the unthinkable happened to my family. We were driving on a 31 degree day in misting. It was the Sunday after Thanksgiving in 1978. And we hit preferential icing going over a bridge and went down an embankment. My father and sister were killed. My mother and brother sustained no physical injuries, and I went through a shredder. I broke my back at T456, so the right across the chest. The C1, I broke both my wrists. I collapsed a lung, and I also got injured in my pancreas that left me unable to eat for 60 days. So as in 1978, they didn't feed you very well through a tube, and so I went from a 119-pound, very athletic boy to 79 pounds in less than 60 days. That I was in a coma for 3.5 days. I woke up, opened my eyes, my life. I'd gone to sleep in the car, snuggled up to my sister, so I went to sleep and woke up to a completely different life. And so that's the traumatic. So I'm a paraplegic at T4, completely paralyzed. And then basically, the long story short would be I started yoga 12 years after that, and that started my path towards yoga.
Mm-hmm. And what was your beliefs about yoga when you first started your practice?
When I first started my practice, why I came to yoga, it was 1991. Um, when I was a little kid, my dad had a couple of whiplash injuries and was doing yoga out of a book. So it was before I was in school. I was under 5. And so I used to watch him practice a little bit. So I had a little bit of an idea. His book, though, was so weirdly sensational back in 19, his last must have been 1972, 1970 maybe. It had all these horrifying pictures of guys putting pipe cleaners through his nose and all these weird all this weird. So I actually used to find this book in his closet to scare myself to look at the pictures. So that was my first hint of yoga, was this kind of crazy, what is that? But by years later, flash forward, I'm 25. I've been living the rehabilitation vision of overcoming my body, making my upper body really strong, and trying to drag my paralyzed body through life. Which we could talk more about what I think the healing vision is from the dominant paradigm. But I just missed my body. I was a really athletic kid. I was in graduate school studying philosophy. Not surprisingly, I was studying the mind-body problem and issues related to consciousness. I didn't know I was thinking about myself, though. Thought I was thinking about philosophy. And I just missed my body. I thought, what better way to integrate mind, body, and whatever we call spirit than an ancient practice that's been doing it for a lot of years. And so I needed to reconnect to my body at 25.
Yes, this is a peak part of life,
Yep.
and
I just knew I had to do a different way. I was becoming a head on a stick. I needed to like find my body again.
mm-hmm. And from what I remember from your book, that wasn't necessarily an easy and fluid path either once you started that search. Uh,
Explain more. Like, what do you mean? Like the
well, just having the limitations of movement
oh
and
yeah,
also the ego of what you thought needed
yeah.
to be.
Well, I got exceptionally lucky as I came across the perfect teacher for me the first time. Right. So I'm an Iyengar practitioner and an Iyengar teacher. Um, and I just got lucky. It was like a kindred spirit thing. So part of why I do the work I do with my nonprofit and train teachers is I want teachers in the world that were as open as Joe was. Her name was Joe Zukovich, is Joe Zukovich. I still hang out with her. That are as open and willing and ready to make people with all types of limitations um, and possibilities, make them a partner in yoga, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just happened to through relationship got really lucky in finding a teacher.
It is true. It's about timing and readiness in many situations and good luck.
It is for sure. But I'm trying to help there be a lot of teachers that will be open to anyone that comes through the door.
Mm-hmm. And I could appreciate the fact that you had a one-on-one relationship.
Hmm.
Uh, I've been fortunate too in that I considered going to a studio in California that helps people with physical challenge negotiate the teacher training. Celia went there, White Lotus, and
Yeah. In Santa Barbara.
yeah,
Yes.
and we have good relations with Sherry and team, and but someone in Raleigh had a teacher school, a teacher training program, and she offered to be a one-on-one teacher for me, and we focused on adaptable yoga as I was already in it,
Right.
and it was such a blessing to find someone who could be open to my particular desire and intentions and limitations, but also
What
grounding me in the
year?
foundations.
What year did you start yoga?
I started practicing in '97
What?
with a graduate of Esther Meyer's lineage, Julie Rozier, and then studied with a Cindy Bulka, who is from that lineage, and a Judith Lassiter, and a
What
lot
year?
of these gentle restorative, and Lakshmi Volkar, and and just a lot of adaptive mindsets along there. And then my teacher, Nancy Gilbert, who's uh, a regional instructor for other teachers, took me under her wing, and that's been joyful.
Yeah, well, I mean, my point was that in 1991, it didn't seem like there was a lot around. You
Yes.
know, the difference and the change from 1991 to now is remarkable compared to what's available and what's out there. So, one of the things that was so essential with Joe is that she was willing to not try to, and I study a lot of asana and pranayama. She didn't need to impose poses onto my body, right? That it wasn't about making me be in the right shape. It was about me experiencing the fundamental building blocks that make any asana possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a different approach, and she didn't know exactly what she was doing either. So what was essential, and this is an essential part of our training, is how do you make your student a partner in what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Because no matter how much yoga knowledge you think you have, I've been doing this long enough and teaching adaptive yoga long enough. There are things you don't know, not only just about any human being, but also about their condition. That you better make them an active partner in what's happening, as opposed to thinking that you're just passing on pieces of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So, the way a lot of our training at Mind Body Solutions, my nonprofit, is trying to mirror some of the things that made the yoga possible in the relationship between Joe and me. So, in some ways, it's modeled on what is the student teacher dynamic that's necessary for this kind of exploration or joint exploration.
Mm-hmm. It's a partnership.
Yep, yep. And
And
that is important. It's not just that, because you might be able to know how to teach a quote traditional student because Austin's been around for a long time, but how that works with all sorts of conditions and different issues is different again. So you need an active voice from the student,
mm,
not just a receptive, passive voice.
right, it's not just feeding someone. It's about
Mhm.
nourishing and fostering and creating their own paradigm.
Yep, that's part of
Which
what happened.
let me ask Celia. Any questions for Matthew?
I'm just curious what other inspirations might have been part of his learning and continue to be part of his learning yoga.
Okay, Matthew, did you
Um,
catch that?
yep, I did. My inspirations, I came to yoga, remember, okay, so I was studying, I live a mind-body problem. If you think about being paralyzed from the chest down, I think the paradigm has actually not seen it right. They conceptualize it wrong. They think of it as a physical injury with psychological and emotional repercussions. I actually think the injury is a mind-body injury at core that has a physical cause. A car bounced over my chest. That's what my brother thinks. And it's got psychological and emotional repercussions, but it's a mind-body injury as it's experienced by me. So I was also studying philosophy at that point and issues related to consciousness, and so I am very much interested as the mind-body relationship as a vehicle of consciousness and as a vehicle for change. And so I have a definitely strong philosophical background coming into my study of yoga. So I reached a point in graduate school right before I started yoga. Not only was I unhappy because I was not connected to my body, but I also became very bothered by the absurdity of that. I was sitting there arguing about minds and bodies on an abstract level, and I really had no idea how they actually interacted. And so there was like a feeling of serious, like, this is insane. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I actually ended up leaving graduate school and studying yoga as a way to further my thoughts on consciousness, to actually study and explore what interaction is. And for me to study what interaction is through neurological deficit, I think gave me some unique opportunities to explore how animation and life force actually inhabits a body, and especially how it inhabits a body, because I'm paralyzed, I'm completely paralyzed from the chest down, how animation and life force fills a body in a way in the parts in which you cannot control. So doing yoga with paralysis has been a study in what it is to have life and consciousness in a body that I can't exactly feel everything and I can't exactly control everything. And that has been, I think, a serious exploration in the manifestation of prana. So I actually think there's a lot going on. So my inspiration was I've been studying consciousness. It turns out that yoga was my chosen vehicle of exploration.
Mm. Well, as you're sharing that, I'm flashing through some of my experiences with paralysis and what I've tried to negotiate in those times, because they were temporary and some were more temporary than others. And what I was trying to do, and I was actively trying to bridge this disconnect. And
Right.
it definitely wasn't happening as I'm sitting there trying to move my hand on
But
the side that was paralyzed to the one that wasn't, as I was becoming more paralyzed. It
right.
was it was it was
And
definitely beyond me.
one of the great, whether it's paralysis or any kind of physical issue, what you learn very quickly is that life force doesn't doesn't fill the body through strictly through will.
Hmm.
And in fact, when you don't have control and you don't have direct contact, your will is rendered useless. If my initial yoga practice had been me trying to do leg lifts and making my ability to lift my leg the measure of success,
Hmm.
that would be ramming my head right into my disability.
Hmm.
So the exploration of what do you do with parts of your body when they don't function the same way, and how do you try to fill the vessel from inside to out, and you learn very quickly that your will has very little to do with that. I mean, your will may be essential to getting you to practice every day, but once you're practicing, if you try to will a part of your body that doesn't work well, you will quickly lapse into violence. So, there's all sorts of things. But I think that in my mind, there's an analogy between doing yoga with neurological deficit and what Freud and Jung were doing when they were trying to study the psyche. Maybe think about when they were trying to study the psyche, they were trying to develop theories of psyche, but they were working with aberrant psychology. They were working with people with neurosis and psychosis in hopes of trying to realize some of the underlying mechanisms, not just physical, the underlying truths about what it is to have a psyche. And if you think about that, the analogous group, if you're trying to explore the mind body relationship rather than the psyche, would be people that have impediments within a normal mind body relationship as a way to try to see and realize what is still accessible, and how life force goes through tissue, right? And it's not
Hmm.
just through a nervous system, as
Right.
we know as yogis, right?
It's many channels.
There's many channels, and that's just not within the medical paradigm. So a lot of what we do when we train health at Mind Body Solutions, we also train healthcare professionals, not just yoga teachers, and trying to get them to realize that there are many ways that life force moves through the body without muscular control,
Mm.
which is essential for if you're aging. It's not just if you have a neurological deficit. And as you're coming down to the end of your life, you don't have as much ability to move your whole body. Like, there are ways to stay connected to your body all the way to the end. And so there are a lot of different ways that my Mind Body Solutions, we've taken the work of adaptive yoga, or whatever term you use, accessible yoga, whatever, and realize the implications for all sorts of issues and conditions.
Mm. Let's pause on that because that is substantive. I just need to digest.
Breathe.
Yes. So,
Yep.
viewers and listeners, as we're all taking a pause, we have an opportunity to have a pearl of wisdom. Uh, in our production of the show, Matthew was willing to delegate pearl production to me as I interpreted some of the concepts from Mind Body Solution. Let's visit the first pearl, and when we come back, Celia will be in the warm seat over here. Pearls of Wisdom as interpreted from Mind Body Solutions teachings. Grounding. I find grounding is an integral part of a yoga pose. It's the initiation as we develop the inhale. Consider noticing your feet and your hips and how they sit on whatever surface you're using. Consider the spacing of 2 fists apart for the knees and the feet if possible. And then we might use a prop, in this case a sandbag. This is a 10-pound sandbag, it's pretty heavy, and the sand could shift. So I would invite you to explore sitting up, trying to have level positioning of the sandbag on the thighs, noticing if there's any shifting. You might move it forward and back. An alternative could be a bag of rice. They're already pre-weighed. This one's 3 pounds. So you can see it's a substantially different element than the sandbag. Sandbag could also be placed on the tops of the feet, if tolerable, to create an even grander sense of grounding out through the bottom. Consider that. Keep your positioning, notice how it feels, and let us know.
Good morning, Matthew. Thank you for spending time with us this morning. I appreciate that.
It's an honor.
I was interested in some of your philosophical thoughts on the mind-body connection, and I know that it's challenging for people who don't have physical differences to get that connection. I'm wondering, how do you work with people who have chronic pain, who have paralysis, who have significant neurological differences to help them make that body-mind connection?
Well, you know, in a way, I can tie this into the mind-body minute or whatever that Howie just did. The pearl, they call the pearly curls. Is that, like, you know, in yoga and especially in an asana, there's a distinction that's loosely made without getting too into the philosophy of it between the subtle body and the overt, gross physical body. Like, so between how you pick up a glass or open your car door, that'd be more on the gross motor physical level, and the subtle movement of awareness through your body that occurs. And so part of what you want to do for a student is introduce them to, you know, experiences of the subtle body. So one of the reasons why the grounding is, I think, so important that Howie was showing in using the sandbags is that when you're sitting, let's say in a chair, and you put, you know, a sandbag, let's say 10 pounds on your lap, it feels like an exhale, like, oh, it feels good. But there's also a slight feeling of rising and a lightness that occurs when you actually experience grounding on a subtler level. And so the idea that there a downward pressure can create a subtle sensation of lightness filling the mind-body relationship, that's something that I want to, like, show any student is actually part of their mind-body repertoire, their mind-body experience. And when you start cueing students in, so grounding is a great way, for example, to create a sense of expansion, right? A sense of filling the vessel. So the more you go down, for example, to make it more simple, there's a rise of energy up. This is a really important experience that transcends neurological deficit, right? That and also someone, for example, you gave 3 different conditions: neurological deficit, pain, and one other. But, like, for example, with someone that's in chronic pain, the sensation of grounding is something you lose because you're constantly just hearing the pain, right? So to get a student to be able to feel parts of their mind-body relationship or aspect of their mind-body relationship that precedes their experience of pain. grounding is one of those experiences. Grounding is a sensation, not an action, right? And we want to teach things like that to people with all sorts of conditions.
I'm wondering too, you talked in an interview about being able to find joy again in your body. What can you tell us what that's been like for you and what you see in your students when that happens?
Well, yeah, I would say that one of the things about living with neurological deficit, if we're talking about that condition or situation, is that, and this happens even when when you get older and you lose muscular strength,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that gravity just seems really, really heavy, right? So like, and your body gets heavier. So when I lift my leg, right, it feels like dead weight, right? When you all of a sudden realize that even though you're you're paralyzed, that if I'm sitting in a chair and I want to lift my right leg up and cross it over my left, right, that instead of just like thinking about it as objects of like picking up the dead weight and putting it on my leg, if at the same time I lift my leg up, I lift my right leg up to cross it. If I push down whatever I can push down, and I'm not just talking physically, that's a
Mm-hmm.
whole other discussion. If I
Mm-hmm.
push down through my left foot and lift my sternum as I lift my leg, right, the whole action gets lighter. In a way, I turn it into a yoga pose. And that freedom of not always having your experience, and particularly your experience in your body, to be always heavy and with just effort and will, that freedom, the realizing of a bigger world, of
Mm-hmm.
the fact that there's more resources in you that can manage and work through whatever life situation you're working with, that freedom I would call joy. When you start to realize and wake up to that, so there's a reason why my book was called Waking.
Mm-hmm.
Wake up to different possibilities in your own situation. To me, that's joyful.
Yes, and I am interested in some of what you're talking about with chronic pain because that's been a challenge for me. It almost sounds like a dual awareness for people. Yes, there is pain. Yes, there is joy. And not having the sole focus be on pain.
What ends
And
up happening with somebody with that's living in chronic pain? I experience a lot of chronic pain. After 38 years of having so many bones broken
mm,
and wear and tear on my body, there's a lot of stuff. And it's really important for a student to be able to recognize levels of sensation that precede the pain. If you're in a lot of chronic pain, and say you're aging and things are getting more and more painful, if the only touchstone you have to your body is mediated through the experience of pain,
mm-hmm,
the loss of internal and subtle freedom is gigantic, right? If you can start showing experiences, like I think the sensation of grounding is one of them,
mm-hmm,
certain sensations that are undeterred and exist simultaneously and even underneath
mm-hmm,
the other part of your brain is experiencing as pain in your elbow, or from like arthritis, pain in your hands, right? So one of the simple examples I give is someone with arthritis, for example, with rheumatoid arthritis, when they're going to pick up a glass, if their whole focus is on the worry and anticipation of what they're going to feel and the amount of pain that they're going to feel as soon as they pick up the glass, right? They're going to live in a much harder world than if when you're going to have that pain when you pick up the glass. But if you can be in your sitting bones, in your feet, and having an evener breath and being aware of that while you pick up the glass, you're in a different world.
wonderful. Yes, thank you. And I think on that note, we're going to go to another pearl and take a look at some of the practice that Howie is going to embody for us.
Pearls of wisdom as interpreted from Mind Body Solutions teachings. Expansion. As we breathe, we hope to expand our lungs. To facilitate that, we are invited to maneuver our bodies in such a way in an upward or outward expansion. By moving these parts, it also invites a greater depth of breathing. Once you have your grounding, can you consider expanding upward or outward? It may not be as obvious when you're expanding upward or outward as it might be when you're settling down or back from the expansion. You might consider putting your elbows on a chair arm, your fingers on your chest, or having a facilitator. And notice what happens when you inhale and you attempt to expand, and then when you exhale, and what you notice. Some people may only notice the diminishing element from the expansion. Explore, see how it feels, and let us know. Well, see, he seems to have grown a beard and gotten a haircut, so I'm back. We did the first pearl about grounding as an initial experience, as Matthew was describing, for connecting to other than just other elements, whether it might be pain or other experiences that we have. How can we connect with the body? I tried to demonstrate some of the teaching through his institute's philosophy of expansion. Matthew, how am I doing so far?
Good. You know, the one thing, the way you taught expansion, and it's a good way to do it, is through breath, right? But one of the really important things about teaching anybody that comes through the door is that using breath for some people is really hard. Let's say if they're a high-level quadriplegic or they're dying of ALS and they're beginning to not be able to breathe, bringing too much a focus on their breath can be good or not good, depending on the situation. But I do think the inhalation is a classic example of expansion, right? But what's really freeing, and getting back to Cecilia's, question, is that when there's and breath is, the relation between breath and consciousness is obviously really sealed together. But there are also a whole other way of thinking about prana in the body. There's a line from ancient texts that says something like, prana follows consciousness more than it follows breath, right? So under that system, or on that thought, first step, remember, the head of yoga has got 1,000 heads, so there's no right way exactly. There's only getting there, and that there are ways to actually help awareness move through the body. And Iyengar yoga does this a lot, where there isn't as much emphasis on breath early until you learn some of the poses, because when you can get some of the poses to be deriving or directing life force, some of the asana, then the breath can actually fan and add into that. So under that conception, more of how awareness moves in the human consciousness, that like the breath is with this image, like imagine the life ember existence is a ember of heat, a coal, and that what breath does is fan the coals of existence. And if you have a little ember and you breathe too hard, it goes out and soot goes in your face. But if you don't give it enough breath, it also goes out. And so that you want to, another way, and this is very freeing for someone that has trouble breathing, is that there are ways for you to experience the fullness of breath with less breath if you can create direction within the mind-body relationship by gravity, by adjustment, by other things. And so it ends up being a huge freeing thing for some people to recognize that their body can still, even if it's paralyzed, for example, can still aid in the distribution of breath. It doesn't just have to generate out from the lungs, which for someone that's dying of ALS, that's huge, because their ability to take inhalation and exhalation is decreasing. And so the more you can get them mileage out of whatever breath they're taking, that's a huge insight. So expansion can have, grounding is a form of expansion.
Mm-hmm.
Boundary is a form of expansion. When you know where your body is in space, there's a lightness that comes into you that's expansive. So part of it is breath, a great archetype or prototype of how to expand, especially the inhalation. But there are a lot of other ways too.
Mm. Time for another pause because this is very substantive.
All right.
And so, as I'm digesting and learning, because I'm on a seminar here too, the next question is forming. And that is for a teacher that may come to learn at Mind Body Solutions, what are the pathways? This is a terribly phrased question. What are the pathways for a teacher to learn at Mind Body Solutions? And what are the experiences that they may look forward to?
Well, first of all, we have a website, mindbodysolutions.org, and we have a private YouTube channel that's on there, or a YouTube channel that's on there. So there are ways to get glimpses into what adaptive yoga is and what our students say about it. We also offer a DVD called Beyond Disability, a yoga practice, which is where these 4 core sensations that you're turning to pearls, grounding, expansion, breath, no, grounding, expansion, rhythm, and balance are the 4 sensations, right? That's accessible. So there are possibilities, and right now we are raising money and have raised money to create more and more modules of video content, right? So digital content. So that's happening, but also we have different levels of training. So we have a level 1, 2. It's a week long where you come, and what's essential about our yoga trainings for teachers is that our students are also our adaptive students, our faculty during the week, that they're with us all week in various forms, sharing their experiences, why yoga helped, why it didn't, how someone was really bad cerebral palsy does yoga. And so I can tell you that from our evaluations that the most important thing that happens for teachers is the exposure to such articulate students, but they're not really students, they're teachers in that setting. So you're going to get a very interactive experience with many types of disability in that week. So you come for a week. We also have an advanced studies, which is beyond that, which again gives you even more exposure to our students. So people say, bring that training on the road. And we can't, because it's so essentially tied up to our students that have been practicing with us for a long time. We'd have to bring like a whole circus on the road. So our trainings are unique, and I honestly don't think there's any opportunity I've seen to get such an insight into what it is to live with a disability. So it's a very experiential exploration for teachers coming. And then so there's advanced studies, but we also offer a mentoring program that's called Opening Yoga. Our program is called Opening Yoga. There's level 1, 2, there's advanced studies, but there's also then a mentoring thing where you do self-study and are mentored by one of our teachers on the process of learning how to create an adaptive yoga class, how to work with a particular student. You get like interaction in Skype, and once you do that, then we have monthly or quarterly mind-body dialogues where I'm on Skype. You get a private channel, and we start talking about all different types of things. So there's a whole cadre of things that you can do that way. But we also offer different types of training. We have a workshop on trauma and PTSD that's much more experiential. It's different than trauma-informed yoga. It's a complement to it. It's taking it. There are insights from that we could talk about that I think are important for yoga teachers to realize. But we also then have a healthcare provider. If you're any kind of healthcare worker coming for a weekend and realizing how to apply mind-body techniques to the everyday delivery of healthcare, that's a big thing that we do. We broke through on different areas that way. And then finally, when you're helping a student into yoga, you also have to help their story evolve. You know, everyone's got a sacred story of what's happened to them and how they're healing. And that process of utilizing story is more in our advanced studies and helping someone's story evolve. But we also have a weekend workshop. There's one coming up in August here. It's one of the most interesting things I've done. It's called Body Mind Story, and it's with a nationally famous, world famous storyteller, myself, who's an author and a yogi, and another author of memoir and a professor of memoir. And it's a weekend of helping stories become into the world, and it's one of the best things I've ever done. So that's another opportunity too. But they're all on our website.
Wonderful. The website, viewers and listeners, mindbodysolutions.org.
Yep.
One key thing that Matthew mentioned was about taking the circus on the road. So we're going to come up to our sponsor spot from You Call This Yoga, who's having a fundraiser in connection with Bliss Body Yoga in Raleigh on August 12th. But to kick it off, we're taking our little circus on the road. You can believe there will be yoga at Sola. Back patio donation class to kick off this wonderful edition. Support You Call This Yoga's mission to help the physically challenged and underserved improve their life with yoga and enjoy this wonderful space in Sola's backyard, freshly washed by a nice thunderstorm. See how it may just wrap around, provide lots of shade or sun when we practice on August 11th from 7 to 8 p.m. at Sola's, Lead Mine and Sawmill Roads in Raleigh to support the nonprofit You Call This Yoga. Come on inside afterwards. There'll be live music too. I know, viewers and listeners, I won't quit my day job. Unfortunately, that is my day job. It's what happens when you're retired and feel you have a passion and a mission and a very small team. I don't mean height-wise either. Speaking of team, Matthew, I was looking at your website, looking at your board and the team members that you have on there, and was really impressed by their skill-specific titles and how you have a lean and effective organization. How has that been for you in building an organization to support your mission?
I have to say that takes a lot of time. I would say that I'm lucky right now that I have the very best team I've ever had, right? But it takes time. And what we've found, running a nonprofit, as you know, Howie, is not all it's cracked up to be. There's a lot of fundraise, you know, all that you have to do, wear hats, you don't know what to do, right? I mean, you're always understaffed and there's never quite enough money, and that's just the given. That we have found that in running an organization, that if we have to keep the people that work for us connected to the core heart of the mission of what we're doing. So we found that now, after 15 years of making other mistakes, that it's really important for us to hire people that are actually teachers doing the work we're actually doing, helping people with disability, because there's so much red tape and frustration in trying to run an organization that unless you know exactly why you're absorbing all the, you know, we're always having to make up what we're doing and figure out new ways to do stuff and piece things together, that all that level of grind is made okay if you know why you're doing it and have worked with students directly and know. So we found that in forming a team, it's essential that they know the heart of what we're doing because they've done it themselves. Every time we've hired someone from the outside that doesn't know the work at the core level, it's been fine, but they get burnt out faster. You know, that you have to know, and whatever you're doing, whatever your passion is, make sure you keep touching the core of what you're doing. Because if you don't, All the things that make an organization possible are not the reasons why you do an organization. You do the organization because, like, you want to help people realize different things in difficult and make yoga accessible. You have to keep doing that to keep yourself nourished. Otherwise, the other stuff becomes overwhelming.
Mm, true that. Celia, thoughts, comments?
I'm curious, Matthew, what have been the surprises for you along the way? What kinds of things happened that you didn't expect, and how were they joyous? Were they scary? And how do you manage them?
Hmm, that's a good but general question. um, you know, there are all sorts of ways you could go with that answer. I mean, learning to fundraise is actually hard and scary.
Mm-hmm.
We at Mind Body Solutions try to generate half of our revenue from programs and then raise half. Um, I would say one of the surprises has been, okay, you got to think about what I'm about to say here. There's a difference between knowing the truth or a truth, not the truth, a truth, and being able to make a truth matter to the rest of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you have a passion and you are on a truth, but being able to make it matter to the way the world is shaped and the way the people are responsive, that's a whole different endeavor. And so it's not, you have to have more than a passion in order to make an organization work, right? And so you have to be able to like have a passion and have it so deep that you're willing to figure out how to make it accessible conceptually and practically to people who might support it, to health organizations. Like, to me, it's unbelievable that we have to work so hard to do programs in healthcare, right? That it seems obvious to me that something is profoundly lacking in what they're doing and they would be helped, right? Not because they're inadequate, but they, like, right now, healthcare workers are burning out. The best way to get mind body principles into healthcare is to train them to the suffering healthcare provider, right? Because they need the same thing the patients need, right? But that argument is very difficult to convince a CFO or a department head that, oh, you should take time and actually invest time in your employee, right? Because if you have an engaged employee, you're going to have better patient outcomes. Now, to me, I know what I'm saying is truthful there, right? But to get an organization with all the complexity that they have to actually turn, it's like turning a gigantic boat. It's like trying to turn the Titanic for them. And so one of the real challenges is to stay patient and not live and die by whether one proposal or one thing works or not. That's why no matter what, Mind Body Solutions will always teach adaptive yoga classes, right? No matter what else we're doing. And we're not trying to take over the world with adaptive yoga classes. I mean, our goal is not trying to have 1,000 yoga classes around the country, right? Exactly, right? And our goal, but we will always do that because that's what keeps us nourished while there's so much resistance in other places. So part of what the challenge has been, and then it's an opportunity, is to, while you're doing and trying to expand the principles of yoga into the world, to stay focused enough and nourished enough on what you do and do because it's sacred, and not let all the work of trying to bring it into the world be the sacred part of your work, because it's strange how different ways people resist, right? And for reasons you can't believe. And so I would say that the patience required to continue, I mean, there's a lot to be said for surviving for a long time as an organization, because eventually you start to get the credibility that you think the truth you're following should have right away. But a lot of times people aren't ready to hear different truths. They're not ready to do it, and you have to be patient with that. So I would say that's one of the many things. Is that joyful? I would say no. but, but you know, the model though, for example, of patience. Like I have a student who was my very first adaptive yoga student who has really bad CP that can't move his hands to his own mouth. He can speak, but he can't do a whole bunch of things. But he is the most happy, biggest smile on his face, biggest jokester, and he has had to be, and he's obviously born with CP. He has mastered patience at a level with his whole life. People with disability have mastered patience. If you could bottle the mastery of patience that people with this disability and more profound disability have mastered, we would change the world in an instant. So when I have to wonder about what patience really means, I look to my students and say, you know what? He has to wait for every food ever to come to his mouth. Think about that. Again, do your work again. So a lot of times my students inspire me.
Valid.
Mm-hmm.
May I? Yes. Okay. Moving along with some of our format and trying to wrap some things together as the show moves on, let's move to the third pearl and see what we can tie together. Pearls of wisdom as interpreted from mind-body solutions. Alignment. Matthew Sanford has been cited as saying, alignment is an effortless form of mind-body integration. It's a complex thought of creating alignment and effortlessly maintaining it. That's why we have props. One favorite prop to sustain alignment is the yoga block. Similarly to the two-fisted reference, our knees might be spaced differently based on our flesh, our wellness, and ability to control parts of our body. So I'll invite you to consider a yoga block or a rolled up towel assessed with your spacing from your fists. For demonstration, we'll use the block this way for me. Also, another element is a yoga strap, or possibly a waist belt from your pants. By wrapping the belt around the thighs, one could cinch things together in a gentle way, and I'm not going to tighten it, but just demonstrate, so that we can maintain an alignment and further engage our mind and body. Try this with yoga props or some conventional house items. See how it feels and let us know. Well, folks, how are your legs aligned now? Have you made any slight adjustments? And what do you notice? Because you spend a lot of times being seated and likely out of alignment, and it's great to drop in, if possible, with or without assistance when you can. One of the things that I found very enlightening was reading Matthew's first book, Awaking.
It's called Waking.
Waking.
Yeah, Waking, a memoir of trauma and transcendence.
Yes, I condensed all that into one word.
Mm-hmm.
I've only recommended it 100 times.
Yep.
And I found that so impacting on my perspective of life and even how I approached yoga and my practice with my limitations and the violence that one could do to oneself. Uh, so I've recommended that for our teachers and anyone that I've come across to gain perspective about the practice of yoga, especially our affiliate teachers who are teaching folks that have some sort of physical challenge and possibly trauma. So I asked Matthew about his book, and he was sharing that he's working on another book. So let's have Matthew give us a little bit of a foreshadowing of what's coming from him.
I would say that the book I'm writing now, where in the first book you follow the very dramatic story of a 13-year-old boy that's been injured that wakes up. In the first third of the book, I'm in the hospital, going through the corrective violence that happens in acute care, and so you're very much invested in the story of the 13-year-old boy and him eventually becoming a father, right? And so that life arc. So there's a very compelling story that's leading more of it. And what happens is that some of the thoughts and underlying insights that I think come from that story are not as fully developed. And so the working title now is Waking Again, starts instead of the story of innocence making it to yoga, right? It's more of a story of seeking from an adult. So it starts with the traumatic flashbacks that I had as a 25-year-old when I started doing yoga, and is trying to be very honest about what it is to be a seeker, and very honest about what healing really is. Healing is messy. It's not just stepping into the light, right? You don't just get to go from the dark to the light. Healing and what yoga does is not bring you just to the light. It actually opens you to a wider spectrum of truth. And I think that what transcendence and healing really is opening to both the light and the dark, and transcending both. So there's that. It's trying to be very honest and intimate with the reader about that life is a struggle, and a path that looks purposeful is a struggle too. So it's very open that way. But I would also say that the book is, so there's further, development of like silence that's from Waking, healing stories, different ideas that were in Waking on a deeper level, but still memoirish, very much grounded in my story. But I also, one of the overriding ideas is like, for example, to tie it to your last pearl, the ancients have said that the natural consequence of alignment is compassion. This book is trying to look at the personal stories of my life and try to help. We always told, hey, be more nonviolent or be more compassionate, and it's presented as a moral insight. I actually think nonviolence and compassion are energetic realizations of presence. So this book tries to use my stories and the things I've learned in yoga as a way, for a storytelling way for you to explore what the sensation of unity is with the space around you, which essentially means you have to be open, nonviolent, and compassionate. So in the background of this book is an exploration of compassion and nonviolence with the hopes of us sustaining our presence on the planet and not destroying it. So it's a big book. But it's still grounded in story. It's not trying to teach you directly anything. It's trying to be very honest about the realizations that yoga brings you through.
Well, and do we have a projected distribution date?
I'm hoping to finish by the end of the summer, which then you can probably figure a year or so after that. But who knows? Publishing now with all the software goes faster. Maybe the big publishing houses can turn it around faster. So we'll see. But I also be looking for a couple of different books. All my blogs are turning into a book, and then there's going to be a coffee table book that has the insights, the one-line things from my teachings that are going to be presented in more visually happy form. And then there's also a documentary film coming out in the next year on the work of Mind Body Solutions. So there's a lot coming.
That is a feast.
Yes.
Right? A feast of feats. Gosh, Matthew, that is so wonderful and inspiring. I'm just digging the whole experience for the last hour and launching it further along our path. Thank you for the modeling, the enrollment, the willingness to expose what is painful as well as what has been successful. It's been really a joy to have you on the show, and to build a bond that started, at least from my end, quite a while ago, and we look to share Mind Body Solutions further. Viewers and listeners, feel free to go to their website, mindbodysolutions.org, learn more, make donations, and inquire about how you can help foster a kinder and healthier world. We're going to sign off now and ask Celia to just slide behind me and wave goodbye.
Oh.
Celia's...
Wow, I say thank you for the work your organization is doing.
Oh, it's quite wonderful.
Yep.
We're just going to put our little pinky in the brain up there. Thank you, Matthew, for the acknowledgement. It has been quite a journey. It's been 10 years since I started the business and 7 years as a nonprofit.
Yep.
Still just getting started.
Me too.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew. We'll have Lisa Clark from Embodiment Yoga next week. Namaste.
Namaste.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.